It was supposed to be a simple day hike. Lily and her brother, Mark, had set out early, determined to explore the old forest that stretched beyond their grandmother's house. The trail, barely visible under years of fallen leaves, wound deeper and deeper into the woods, twisting in ways that made it hard to track their progress. The late afternoon sun started to dip below the horizon, casting long, claw-like shadows between the trees. "We should head back," Mark said, glancing nervously at the deepening twilight. "It's getting dark." Lily nodded, but as they turned around, something felt off. The forest looked different, like they had stepped into a new part without realizing it. The trees were larger, older, their branches thick and gnarled like grasping hands. "Mark, I don't think this is the way we came," Lily whispered, her voice barely more than a tremor in the silence. Mark looked around, his brow furrowing. "We just need to keep going straight. We'll find the way back." But as they walked, the path seemed to change before their eyes, twisting back on itself, leading them in circles. The shadows grew longer, darker. Then they noticed something even stranger. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no rustling of leaves, just an unnatural, suffocating silence. Every step they took felt like it echoed, like the forest was listening, waiting. Suddenly, Mark froze. "Do you see that?" he whispered, pointing to something ahead on the path. At first, Lily couldn't make it out, but as they inched closer, she saw it too. A small cabin stood in a clearing, its walls overgrown with moss and ivy, as though it had been abandoned for decades. "We didn't see that on the way in, did we?" Lily asked, her voice shaking. Mark shook his head. "No, we didn't." The cabin was strange, out of place, but they were tired and lost. They decided to check it out, hoping maybe there was some clue about where they were, or even a phone. They stepped inside the cabin, the old wooden door creaking on its rusted hinges. The interior was simple. A single room with a fireplace, a rickety table, and 2 old wooden chairs. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by their entry. The only other thing in the room was a small leather-bound journal lying on the table. Curious, Lily picked it up, flipping through its yellowed pages. Most of it was illegible, smeared with age, but one entry stood out, written in neat, careful handwriting. "Don't stay after dark. They come for those who wander too far." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "Mark, look at this," she whispered, showing him the journal. Before Mark could respond, a sudden tapping sound came from the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. They both froze, their breath catching in their throats. They hadn't seen anyone around. They were miles from the nearest town. Tap, tap, tap. The knocks came again, louder this time. Mark edged toward the window, carefully pulling back the curtain to peer outside. His face went pale. There's nothing there," he whispered. The knocking continued, even though the clearing outside was empty. Lily felt her skin crawl, her hands trembling as she backed away from the door. Then the knocking stopped. Silence pressed in, thicker than before. And then a voice, low, almost a whisper, coming from just outside. "Come out. It's time to go." Lily's heart pounded in her chest. "Mark, we need to hide," she said, her voice barely a breath. But Mark didn't move. His eyes were wide, staring at the door, unblinking. "Mark," she said again, panic rising in her throat. Slowly, Mark turned to face her, his face slack, as if he wasn't entirely there anymore. "We should go," he said, but his voice wasn't his. It was the same voice they had just heard outside. Lily stepped back, her pulse racing. "Mark, what's wrong with you?" But Mark was already walking toward the door, his hand reaching for the handle. "We need to go," he repeated in that same strange, distant voice. Before she could stop him, the door swung open. Cold, unnatural air swept inside, and beyond the threshold, the forest was no longer there. Instead, a vast, endless void stretched out, filled with shifting shadows and whispers. Lily screamed, grabbing Mark's arm, trying to pull him back. But as she touched him, his skin felt cold, too cold, like he wasn't alive anymore. His eyes turned to her, empty and hollow, a chilling smile spreading across his face. "We belong to them now," he said, his voice low and cold. Lily backed away, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Mark wasn't Mark anymore. He was something else, something that had been waiting for them, something that had been hunting them. She turned to run, but the door slammed shut on its own, trapping her inside the cabin. The shadows outside the window began to press against the glass, their shapes becoming more defined. Figures with long, crooked limbs, watching her with hollow eyes. And then, the journal fell from the table, landing open on the floor. Lily glanced down, her heart pounding as she read the final words scrawled across the last page. They take one and leave the other, but only until the next one comes. As the figures outside began to whisper her name, Lily realized the horrifying truth. Mark was already gone, and now they were coming for her.